How's it going, guys? Joe here. Hope you've all been doing well. Today I'm gonna basically be recording the last Fitbit iteration video that I've been doing recently. So let's just get to it. So what are we gonna be doing today? Well, sadly we're not gonna be doing any coding because I'm actually wrapping up this series and I'll explain why. So yeah, this is unfortunately going to be the last part of this series because I really wasn't getting anywhere, and it doesn't really make sense for me to at this point. It doesn't make sense for me to basically do this app anymore, and I'll explain why and what better alternative is. So, yeah, I'm not going to be doing this anymore because actually I'll get into that in a little bit, but yeah, I'm not doing any more Fitbit development in this series, unfortunately. However, if you do like the Fitbit development stuff, I do have another series planned. It doesn't relate to lucid dreaming, but it is a Fitbit development series for various things. Just to give you an idea on what it's going to entail, it's going to involve I'm going to be basically creating my ultimate clock face. At least that's the idea. And I'm going to basically be designing my own clock face, which will pretty much look like the one I already have. But I'm going to add some additional functionality to it. I'm going to try to make it so that if someone knocks on my door, for example, it basically makes my Fitbit vibrate like an alarm. As someone who's hard of hearing, I sort of struggle with that sort of thing, and I think I would find that really helpful to be able to just get notified like that. So how am I going to do this? I mean, that's for the future, but I'll either use some sort of microphone thing, and once it gets to a certain decibel, then something going on. Either the doors being knocked or the fire alarms going off. The other thing I could do is I have this actual doorbell thing, which not everybody might know to use this, but for those that did, I could actually get an electronic voltage sensor that you plug into the wall, and I plug in the doorbell thing, and if it draws more voltage all of a sudden, the doorbell is probably being rung. And that would be a way to send a signal to basically alarm my Fitbit with that. Then I'd also like to get it so that it goes off if I get an email with certain keywords and stuff like that. So my ultimate Fitbit clock face was one that tells me stuff that I need and has that additional functionality like those alarms in those specific situations. I'll probably be using the Raspberry Pi to help assist in this process as well. So I think that'll be an interesting series. So even though this one's coming to an end, that other stuff that I just teased right there is happening in the future. At least that's the plan. It might not be until several months from now, but it will most likely happen. And I'll have a link in the description when that comes out. As of right now, there's no such thing, so it's to be determined. So yeah. The other thing you might have noticed is the microphone might sound a little bit different. So I've been messing around with microphone filters recently, as you're probably aware. And I mean, when I first started doing this, I thought everything was way too quiet to be able to hear anything at all. Then I improved it with certain filters and moving away from my webcam mic to my clip-on that I'm wearing right now, and you can hear me pretty much just as well wherever I am. But then that's where things actually got quiet, and it kind of sounded terrible. I thought the filters that I was using, while it did help with background noises and things like that, I thought it made it sound very unnatural. You know that sound when you what's the right word for it, where you basically have it so loud that it just loses quality. That's what I felt like my sound was doing before. What I have now shouldn't be doing that anymore. It's definitely not the best filter in the world, but it gets rid of that unnatural sound and also brings up the volume quite a bit compared to what I've had in the past. So this is probably going to be my final microphone filter. I think I finally got it fine-tuned to what I like. There are certain things that could be improved about it, like the sound balancing when I'm quiet versus when I'm loud. Having a finer balance between those things, but I don't think it's too bad right now. And just having natural sound again is, to me, a huge relief. So this is my sound setup now. You're probably hearing some music too, potentially. That's also new. It's something that I didn't want to invest time in and figure out before, but I found a nice, simple solution for that. So that will be going on from now on, most likely. So now there's music in there. You might notice that my past streams have not had that. I just hadn't invested the time in trying to figure out all that nonsense from a production standpoint, but I went through it now. It's a lot simpler than I thought. So now it exists. So now that we pretty much caught up, let's get on with the rest of the video. So yeah, this is going to be the last part of the series, but there will be a new Fitbit series coming out, so don't worry about that if you want to see more Fitbit content. But let me explain why I'm no longer doing this series. It mainly comes down to the fact that Fitbits just don't detect things very accurately. So unfortunately, I've tried pretty much everything I could at this point. I mean, there's probably a few more things that I could have tried, but it's not even 100% accurate, and I feel like I actually have better luck just estimating stuff myself. I'll probably go into that a little bit more in depth later on, but I just have better luck figuring out the sleep cycles and those kind of things on my own. And I actually kind of prefer that nowadays with my current approach. So even if I did create the app, I probably would have stopped using it at this point, sadly. So I hope that kind of explained why I'm not doing it anymore. Main thing is the Fitbit sleep chart mechanism to detect where we are in a sleep cycle is just not very accurate. It's only about 40% accurate from what I've heard, and the thing you have to keep in mind with the sleep charts even is those aren't going to be all that accurate either. There are certain things that might work well, but I'm sure there's some caveats to that as well. Like, even if it predicts when you had REM sleep for dreaming and you basically woke up right after it, it probably doesn't have the very start of it down very accurately. And yeah, even with that, that's not enough to rely on. The thing you also got to keep in mind is when it reports when you're in REM, that actually wasn't necessarily calculated live. What it actually did was it took pulse and motion, as well as sort of matching up against a standardized sleep cycle, and then made predictions based on all of that. And it actually ends up using the chart as a whole. It doesn't really do it on the spot like you might think. Like when it calculates a chart last minute, basically right before you see it. And so given that, how would you expect it to work nicely? I have an example I want to show you this example real quick. So this is probably gonna blow your mind. So I want to show you an example of how sleep charts are calculated last minute. So here's an example of one of my Fitbit sleep charts from, it was on one night, basically, and doesn't look like much yet, but notice how much deep sleep there is. Well, I got to sleep in a little bit this day, and I recalculated this a couple hours later, and see the difference right there? See, this is the same day. Notice how the deep sleep changes from here to here. 32 to 1 hour and 54 minutes. All of this happened before 6 o'clock here, right? All of this also happened before 6 o'clock. All of a sudden, my deep sleep quadrupled. Why? Because it recalculated everything as a whole. Now I know you're thinking right here, why am I missing some REM? Well, that's because I did 3 wild attempts and actually woke up every time, so there was no REM achieved at all right there. It was because I had failed maintained awareness attempts at the time, 3 of them. So I missed out on a fair bit of REM, but whatever. So yeah, I just want to point out that should give you an idea on how sleep charts are inaccurate. Because that, even though it was on the same day, it looks very different because it calculated everything as a whole. And when looking at literally everything, it was like, you know what? This is more likely than this. Let's go with this. So you can see why it's not 100% accurate. None of this data was live. This was final calculations after looking at a whole night's worth of data. So how can you, if that's not very accurate, how can you expect it to be accurate with live data? I mean, there kind of was patterns with the heart rate when I was in REM versus not, but there wasn't always a correlation with that. I have specifically looked at my REM charts and kind of paid attention to the timings, and my heart rate was still at like 48 even in REM. So there isn't always a correlation. And trying to get the whole mechanism to detect stuff accurately is just, no. It's not worth my time also. So because of the inaccuracy, it not being worth my time necessarily, and my better alternative, I am ending this project. So what I do instead is I actually map things out in sort of a manual way. So the thing is, if I have a relatively consistent sleep cycle, then the timings are going to be relatively consistent. Just to give you an example, I want you to keep in mind that this is anecdotal and it's going to vary between individuals. And also that same individual, it will vary over time as well because of the conditions. If you have these wild sleep cycles, then that'll explain why the sleep chart or the sleep cycle can be kind of messy and unpredictable. Even with a fairly consistent sleep schedule, it could be way off, but it could even be similar. There's just a lot of variables at play to know exactly how to predict it. And I've even tried out this app that somebody else made where they try to have a detect REM using a neural network. Oh, one of the other alternatives would be to pull sleep data from an actual API, and rather than having it use sensor-based stuff, have it actually use its own prediction algorithm and then use an API to have it connect to the internet like every 30 seconds and pull back what it thinks it's in. I did try doing some of that, but I had no luck getting the API to work. And also, it's probably not going to be all that accurate either. It might be in some situations, but you'd actually be better off building your own mental muscles. That's one of the other reasons. Try not to rely on anything external for your lucid dreaming practices in general. And the thing is, I do have to put certain compromises into doing things that way versus the Fitbit stuff, having that try to help me out. But I have actually had better luck doing things on my own, and there were certain consequences I was getting by relying on the Fitbit versus doing my own stuff as well. So when you really look at it, we look at things in the real world, it's more beneficial to sort of figure things out yourself rather than using something like that. Now, there is an EEG device, I guess, from my understanding, that can sort of read brainwaves. It's not going to be 100% accurate, but it's certainly going to top off the Fitbit, and devices that use your wrist, basically, and relies on external factors when everything's going on internally. And that might be able to detect REM, but I don't think it's out there, and you'd probably be better off doing your own stuff anyway. The other thing is, I've been kind of focusing more on dials, and I actually prefer to call it regained awareness these days, rather than using the acronyms dialed and wild that you might be familiar with. I use a term that, well, not really a term, but a way to describe what those things are in plain English, basically. So dialed is a regained awareness dream, the dream where you become lucid later on in the dreaming process. Maintained awareness is a wild, because you maintain your awareness all the way into the dream. So rather than using wild and dialed, I use maintained or regained awareness respectively. That's another difference in my philosophy / mentality nowadays too. But anyway, I only brought that up because now I tend to focus more on regained awareness stuff too. That is actually quite valuable. So yeah, regarding the working out the cycles though, I tend to go based on natural awakenings. Usually if I wake up roughly around this time, then I tend to go back into REM about an hour after naturally awakening from REM, for example. And that's been pretty accurate for me, assuming that I'm having relatively consistent sleep cycles and all that. Relatively consistent is that close still, even if it's not exact. It seems like plus or minus X amount still is consistent in that regard. So pretty much everything I do, I try to work off of natural awakenings that occur. That's the other thing to keep in mind. So rather than waking up with some sort of alarm, I like to just go with natural awakenings. And with my sleep cycle, they tend to be pretty consistent. But one thing I can do if it's not is just go to bed a bit earlier. Chances are I probably need to anyway. So yeah, I think focusing on that type of thing rather than some sort of app is more beneficial than trying to use an app and then also not have it be very reliable. Did I finish my point I said about trying out this other app? Well, I actually went off on a tangent with that. To come back to that point, somebody had designed an app where it detects when you go in REM based on training your neural network with sensor data, I believe. And it kind of trains it with sleep data. And I think they trained it with the specific person. And remember, it varies between individuals. So does the accuracy. So that was not very accurate, to say the least. It did go off at one point, but sometimes I was awake for like 10 minutes when I thought I was in REM or dreaming sleep. So that didn't work very accurately either. And if you're wondering about the status since last time, I don't even remember what happened last time, to be perfectly honest, but if I remember correctly, it didn't log anything. I was trying to have it log time ranges that I thought it might have been in REM, I believe. It didn't log anything at all whatsoever. So that's a bit unfortunate, but that's what ended up happening. So yeah, usually if I'm doing a maintained awareness attempt, I won't go into details too much, but if I have a natural awakening and I want to do that, usually I'll set an alarm for some time later and do my attempt. Pretty much everything I've been doing these days does not rely on the Fitbit to help me with it. And I've actually been finding that quite helpful. I've been sort of working on my own sort of techniques. I don't know if I'm really ready to share them yet, but I'll try to find some place where I can share them. At the very least, I'll try to post a voice recording in the description sometime in the future when I talk about this. I'll probably have it uploaded to Google Drive, and then you can basically use a link on there. So that'll work regarding that if I ever release that to the public in the future. But in general, I tend to set my alarm for some time before I think REM is going to occur. So rather than setting it for like 5.5 hours or something, I think that's way too unpredictable, and the granularity needed compared to what one typically has is gonna be way off from night to night. But I find that things are a lot more accurate based on when the natural awakenings occur. Those I cannot predict, but they tend to happen, and it tends to be relatively consistent when my next REM period begins from that natural awakening. So that's how I prefer to map things out. So when I actually do an attempt, I will say that I sometimes like to set an alarm based on a natural awakening that's already happened, so that I'm closer to my next REM period before I actually begin my attempt. That way I'm not spending like a whole hour trying to maintain awareness. I can get some non-REM in before that. Then I also kind of get a jump start that way too. I may only have to wait like 10 minutes. It really depends on the timings and all that. Could be less, but I haven't quite managed to achieve that yet. So I might set it for like when I think I'm gonna have about 10 minutes left before REM. That gives me a bit of margin and also time to do whatever I'm practicing. Some of that will take time given how tired I usually am in the morning. I have to kind of so the weird thing is I'm a pretty light sleeper in the night, early in the night, but I'm a very deep sleeper later in the morning. Sometimes just with natural alarms, I might set like 4 or 5 alarms and not even remember snoozing until like the 4th alarm later. I don't even remember snoozing the first 3 because, well, what most likely happened was I was in a deep state of non-REM and I just forgot everything being in that deep state. It could have just been terrible timing with non-REM, But let's face it, it probably is a bit deeper with less sleep, which is something I really should be avoiding. But let's see, what was I? Yeah, so I kind of base my alarms off of natural awakenings, and I find that works really well. I actually don't do maintained awareness attempts unless that's fairly predictable. Otherwise, I'll focus on my regained awareness attempt. And the thing with the timing is that doesn't have to be 100% accurate with the maintained awareness. I'm coming back to the maintained awareness discussion now, because obviously if I do it too early, I'm just going to be spending a while maintaining awareness. I'm just going to be spending longer on that, which is going to be far better than having some inaccuracy from the Fitbit. I mean, I would rather try to maintain awareness for like 15 minutes with a slightly inaccurate timing versus having the Fitbit not really work that well for things at all. And the other thing is, obviously I could predict that it'll be an hour before REM, but it's actually more like 38 minutes. Sometimes I'm off in that regard too. I'm trying to come up with the best approach for when that occurs. But it'll be a lot more accurate than trying to go based off the beginning of the night, because sleep can be very messy, as we very well know. And when I say an hour and those types of things, I was saying that's going to vary between individuals, because sleep cycles are not that tidy. It's going to vary a lot between individuals and stuff. I specifically said that because I only kind of said what it is for me. Don't assume that's what it is for you. Map out your own territory regarding that. So let's see here. My mind's blanking a little bit, but I'll just trust my intuition to keep me going with this live stream, which is a beneficial tool for lucid dreaming as well. Intuition. What I'm doing right now is intuition. So yeah, like I said, I like to manually do things in sort of the way I said. And during the time I'm doing the attempt, I would be doing whatever strategy I'm doing at the time after that alarm goes off, based on the initial natural awakening. So that's kind of how I typically do my stuff. And if I don't know where I am in a cycle, I'm just going to go for a regained awareness approach. It's a bit less destructive on the sleep cycle too. I find myself doing that a fair bit, and I'm totally fine with that. What I like about the regained awareness stuff is it's not really sensitive to timings. Usually, I can do something and then it could potentially take hold regardless of the timing. So, yeah, that's kind of how I do things now. And it doesn't involve the sleep chart. That's why I think even if I did the sleep chart, I probably would end up switching to what I'm doing now anyway. And all this stuff that you see right here is pretty much meaningless. That's right, pretty much all this stuff is a bit meaningless. So yeah, I hope you understand why I'm ending this series, but I'm trying to explain why and a better alternative. Map out your own sleep. And what you can do with that would simply be, if you do have natural awakenings that you can work with, pay attention to the times that you wake up and stuff, and just kind of go from there. Some people set an alarm at the very beginning of the night. I would prefer to go based on natural awakening, because I find that it's a lot easier to be more accurate with that. Even that could be slightly inaccurate, but I find it's far less inaccurate. And it makes sense because I'm actually working with what my sleep cycle gave me that night, pretty much. And then making some slightly further predictions when not quite being done with that yet. And still having attempt opportunities. So I hope that makes sense. So, I think I pretty much covered what I would for this video, but there is one more thing I wanted to talk about real quick, and that has to do with maintained awareness. I've talked about actually waking up quite a bit throughout the series, and I want to talk about how to get around that because I think I've found my way around those issues. I didn't really prepare for how I'm going to talk about this, but we'll see how it goes. Let's do an intuition experiment, shall we? We'll see if my intuition leads to the right explanation with hopefully no mistakes. I'm just going to trust in it. We'll see what happens. Trusting my intuition now. Ready? So I want to explain what I like to do with maintained awareness stuff regarding my actually waking up issues. So what I'm referring to now is being in the dream formation state, being in the state where I'm actually entering the dream, possibly having auditory, visual, and or tactile sensations. So I'm not just like trying to fall asleep, I'm like actively beginning to dream. Like the muscle atonia is most likely kicking in right at this moment. I'm that far in the process. This is what I'm going to be referring to for the rest of this video pretty much. So whenever I talk about an attempt, I'm really talking about an attempt in which I've gotten that far and what happened within there. So obviously we have this window for, don't know if this is the best analogy here, but we have this window for maintaining awareness into the dream. Then we have a tiny little window for actually entering the dream and going through that process, then the dream itself. I'm talking about that tiny little window when entering the dream and possibly experiencing bodily distortions and crazy things like that. So that's where I would struggle to accidentally wake up. I would be experiencing those bodily distortions most likely, maybe even some hallucinations. And then I do something that causes it to all suddenly stop and possibly has an adrenaline burst. Where I just get this split second burst of adrenaline and everything just stops. So when I've talked about accidentally waking up in the past, that's kind of what I'm referring to. When everything just stops, and I was clearly in that process of entering the dream. So I've done a whole bunch of different experimentation. I won't really go over all that because the actual answer of what to do is quite simple, believe it or not. All that, you're probably not going to like how simple this is. So if you are struggling with actually waking up because you've experienced that before and you kind of expect it to continue when you have any experiences, I want to talk about how I've kind of overcome that issue. I probably haven't 100%, I'll just put that out there now, but I mostly have. And I mean, just because I mostly overcome it doesn't mean that I'm not going to ever make a mistake with it again. I mean, let's get that common sense out of the way. There's a chance that I will screw up again. And there's always that chance anytime. But most of the time that would be because I forgot what I do, maybe because I haven't done it for a while. That's to be expected. I'm still kind of adjusting to a new mentality yet. But I mostly only notice the issues if I haven't done it for a while. because the new mentality I've been doing recently just kind of slowly dissolves back into the old one if I haven't done it for a while, which has been the case recently. I've only done it about 2 or 3 times in the last month. I've only experienced that dream formation state about 2 or 3 times in the last month, and that's not what my normal average would be, because usually I attempt a bit more, but since I've been trying to figure out the best strategy recently, I've been mostly failing. And I'm like making compromises because I have stuff that I know works, but I'm trying to refine that. And I'm mostly accidentally falling asleep so nothing ends up happening. Slip into a dream. Normal one. And maybe have a regained awareness. Who knows? But let me talk about the mentality that I try to have during these experiences now when I'm actively entering the dream. So it's quite simple. I don't specifically do an objective at all. I just do whatever I feel like at the time and trust that I'll do the right thing. Now, you might remember back then I was always trying these different experiments where I'd maybe try focusing on my breathing in some way, focusing on my eyelids, trying an auditory visualization, wiggling my toes, or kind of imagining it, whatever. I'd be trying all these different things and mostly fail, right? Well, what often happened during an experience is I would be perfectly fine for a while, like maybe 30 seconds. And then a split second gets the better of me where I end up screwing up. I'm perfectly fine up until this split second. Well, I think a huge part of that is forcing myself to do some specific objective. Not being able to necessarily think of how I rehearsed it. And then with my doubts from that, ultimately failing. So I think that's where my main issues came from. I would be trying this specific thing. I've been rehearsing for it so I can think of it during the experience. But rehearsal's actually been making it worse because while I feel like I can remember it good in waking life, by the time I'm in an experience, my mind probably won't work as well. I'll sort of feel like I'm on the spot, have the equivalent of stage fright, and basically force myself. Because I've been rehearsing for a while, I have this sense that I practice something, so that increases the pressure of trying to remember what that thing is that I practice. And boom, I failed. So yeah, that's a problem, isn't it? So I think a lot of my issues actually came from trying some specific thing and then basically pressuring myself to do it to the point where things feel unnatural, then I eventually shock myself awake. Might doubt myself and all those things. But the other thing that often happened was I would eventually question if things are still happening or if I accidentally woke up. And when I questioned it, if the answer was no, I haven't accidentally woken up yet, then I would keep questioning it until the answer is yes. That's why things would eventually spiral out of control, I think. That pressure that I was having trying to do some specific thing, and then questioning if I'm still doing all right, basically, until I wasn't doing all right anymore. Why would I be perfectly fine for 30 seconds and then suddenly have a split second where I screw up? I think one of the things was that repeatedly questioning if it's still going. I just wasn't questioning it before then. Once I started questioning if it's still going, that's where things would go foobar, basically. So And then I think there is also the element that I would be thinking about waking up and be concerned that those thoughts would eventually lead to actually waking up. I think a combination of those three things, combined with the expectation that I've been waking up in the past, so therefore it's very possible right now. I think a little bit of each one of those things would ultimately lead to all these problems that I was having. And all of these problems technically got created from just trying to solve it in the first place. Sometimes the way you solve problems with this sort of thing is not trying to solve it. How ridiculous does that sound? But it's actually true with this sort of thing. You might be used to working with technical things and knowing about things, trying to fix it is actually the way you have to go with that. But when it comes to this, it's sort of the opposite. You can very easily create problems that technically don't exist. And that's essentially what I've been doing. So, what is the solution to all this? To not specifically do anything at all, and not rehearse what I'm doing either. Rehearsing what I'm doing is probably just going to make things worse. I just want to trust myself that I'll know at the time, because what I'm doing really isn't all that complicated, but by rehearsing I'm kind of acting as if it is, and then I get that sense that it is complicated during the experience, and I'm not failing because I'm doing it wrong, but my doubts of doing it right, trying to remember what I rehearsed and all those things, or why I fail. I didn't even fail because I did it wrong. It was a different reason. It was really the concern of doing it wrong that caused me to fail. So, not having a specific objective and doing whatever I feel like at the time is probably the right approach. I've been having quite a bit of success with that mentality recently. And what's really amazing about this is that feeling just kind of goes away over time. The feeling that I'm going to fail just kind of diminishes over time. Now, you're probably shaking your head thinking, well, if I do that, I'm going to fail. I'm going to be failing. Well, that may be true, but only because you're adjusting to this new mentality. You're used to the one that you've been having for X amount of time. You have to make an adjustment to your mentality, and that's going to take some time. So just allow yourself to fail by not having a specific objective and practice with more experiences. Eventually it will just kick in and it'll become second nature. Just allow experiences to get you to that point. And that's probably even true if you wake up from getting too excited. You can meditate and stuff like that, but you can also just allow that excitement to diminish with more experiences. When you're getting used to this, the excitement will diminish as you get used to this, and then the problem should go away from that. So whether it's excitement or the concern of waking up, don't do any specific thing. Just do whatever you feel like at the time and trust yourself with that. If you fail at first, that's normal because you're adjusting to this new mindset. Allow that adjustment to take place with more experiences, and there you go. It could technically go away within one experience, but it could also take more. Either way is completely normal as you're adjusting. And why am I maybe still occasionally failing? Because I hadn't done this for weeks or months at a time, and even though I was adjusted at the time, I slowly sort of unadjusted. All I need to do then is just allow myself to adjust again. Simple as that. So, because what I noticed during some experiences is I would actually be fine for about 30 seconds, and then I would start doing my experiment, whatever that may be. The moment I start doing that experiment, newsflash, is where I failed. If I would have just kept doing what I was already doing, I would have been perfectly fine. So if you are doing something specific like focusing on the monkey mind or the hypnagogia or whatever it may be, if that's what you feel like doing, just keep doing that. Keep it natural, because that's what you're already doing to begin with. Don't worry about being successful at first. Just try it. All I can say is try it. Just get your feet wet with this new mindset, and like as you get more experience with stuff, same thing will happen with this. It probably would be normal to fail the first 15 times you try this. Whatever it takes to adjust to this new mentality. And if you have doubts, just you can allow that doubt to happen, as it will just diminish over time with more experiences. Because I find that I tend to learn best from the experiences directly, and the rehearsals were probably doing nothing for me. The experiences themselves were. So what I tend to do now, if I do make a mistake, I will tell myself what I maybe should have done differently in that specific scenario. That doesn't mean I'm gonna do this again next time in this different way. Like, for example, I might make a mistake regarding breathing. I don't know. And maybe because I happen to focus on breathing that time. If I know what I think I should have done differently, I'll tell myself I should have done this differently. Next time I might not even think about breathing at all, while what I just said was irrelevant. It's preparing me for that specific scenario that happened. It might not be that way at all next time. So yeah, essentially what I do is I can't believe we haven't dropped any frames yet on this live stream. Anyway, I don't really practice anything specific. But if I do screw up with something, I'll tell myself maybe what I should have done differently in that scenario, but I'm not going to keep practicing that. I just tell myself once and forget I ever told myself. My only rehearsals are the experiences directly. I don't practice outside of this, basically. Nope. So I allow the experiences directly to teach me rather than these rehearsals that I do outside to prepare for them. Not a good idea. Just work with the experiences directly, and I mean, it feels so weird not preparing for it, I will say that. But again, if you keep practicing that unprepared mentality, you just learn to pick up whatever you're doing and keep doing that. So, I mean, it's like when you find a nice rhythm, you just keep doing that rhythm. You don't suddenly stop and do something else. You keep going with that rhythm because it works. Same thing here. So, yeah. Failing is going to be normal at first with the new adjustment to the mentality, but allow those to occur, basically. I even find that reminding myself that it doesn't matter if I fail during the experience actually has been quite helpful too. I don't specifically force myself to do that, but I let that become an instinct from the experiences directly, rather than practicing like, hey, it doesn't matter if I fail. Pretty much my only practice happens during the experiences themselves. I pretty much don't think about it at all outside of those. They are going to be better teachers than any rehearsal you might do. Rehearsals to me are a red flag. If you find yourself trying to rehearse for this or that, that's, to me, is a red flag. Get away from that mentality. And allow the experiences directly to teach you, and just because there are all these different things you can do. You can focus on the monkey mind, you can narrate the experience, you can focus on hallucination, focus behind your eyelids, you can imagine a movement. It doesn't matter. You can do whatever you feel like at the time. Get used to that idea. And I've been finding that very helpful. I certainly noticed that on days when I had it multiple times in one day. I noticed that when I didn't really do anything in particular, that's when I was doing the best. And I got better with each consecutive one in a given day. So that's what taught me to do that in general. And that's been very helpful. So I hope that makes sense. Ditch the mentality you have to do anything specific. And yeah. So one other thing I've been experimenting with recently has to do with the transition itself. So actually, I will point out that what I tend to do naturally is either focusing on the monkey mind, narrating the experience, maybe focusing on my eyelids or the hypnagogia that's already there. I think that's what I've been naturally doing recently, and those are natural instincts at this point. One of them will feel natural at the time. I'll probably already be doing whatever it is as it is, and then I just keep doing that thing. I could switch from one thing to another, but not with any preparation beforehand. I mean, yeah. So, yeah, I hope that's helpful. One other thing I've been messing with recently is the transition into the dream itself. I've been actually sort of, after about maybe 10 or 20 seconds, I would maybe try to gently open up my eyes or something, and I'd find myself opening up my dream eyes. It happens a lot sooner than I think, too. Or making some slight body movements to get out of bed. So I've been finding that sometimes I transition to my dream body a lot quicker than I think. It might be like 40 seconds later. I might think that I haven't transitioned to it yet, but I find that I can move my hands easily or something like that. And that most likely happened because I was already transitioned to the dream body and I was only moving my dream hands or something. Literally even move my hand to my face and go like this to open up my eyes, and all of a sudden I can see. I've been experimenting with that sort of thing and just opening my eyes after like maybe 20 or 30 seconds. I've been finding that even though it feels like I really open up my eyes, I really just open my dream eyes, and it's amazing how much quicker the transition occurs when I do something like that. That's not necessary at all, but if I'm feeling lucky and feel like trying that, that's what I tend to default to. And interestingly, I found that if I felt like I was going to accidentally wake up, focusing on my eyes or some bodily movement that feels natural and incremental, whether I'm moving my hand like this if it's flat on the bed or something, I find that doing that in a way that feels natural and incremental, even with the feelings of waking up, this natural and incremental thing takes over that feeling, and I end up being successful. It's amazing how much it draws away from that feeling. As long as I'm doing something like this, or even just the act of trying to open up my eyes, even if I have a strong feeling of waking up, doing something simple like that just kind of takes that feeling away. As long as I'm just focusing on this one thing, then all of a sudden it doesn't matter anymore. It's amazing what it does. So Moral of the story is do whatever you feel like at the time and get used to that mentality. And I've been experimenting with different types of transitions where I try to get out of bed in a way that feels natural and incremental. I don't necessarily imagine this. I make it a very gentle physical effort in a way that feels natural. Or open my eyes. I either open up my eyes or get out of bed first. I find either one tends to work, but it really depends on the scenario. I find that the eye opening thing is occasionally difficult, mainly because I would accidentally open up my physical eyes, which I've done a few times before. And there's been a couple times when that did not shock me awake, surprisingly, but other times when it has. Kind of depends on how sudden light comes in from the real world. If it's gradual, then it probably won't shock me awake, but I find that if I wait like 20 or 30 seconds, then even if I try to open up my eyes, I end up opening my dream eyes rather than the physical one, even though it very much felt like I was opening my physical eyes. So, one way that I almost guarantee success is I do whatever I feel like for about 20 or 30 seconds and then try opening up my eyes. I would raise my eyebrows, but that's where I'm prone to opening my physical eyes. It's probably not going to happen if I'm far enough in the process, but if I do it too early, then it's a problem. I'm still doing some experimentation with that, but we're making some pretty great strides with trying out that. The earliest transition I've had into a dream was probably about 10 seconds in by opening my eyes. I ended up opening my dream eyes. I could see stuff already, but then it kind of vanished, and then I tried it again, and then it took hold for real that time. I've been finding my average transition length take about 20 seconds now doing that. It probably happens quicker than you think, but sometimes it might actually be prolonged. What's interesting is I would get out of bed, I would still feel the bodily distortions on my physical body while at the same time I'm standing in the dream. It feels weird to basically experience both of them at the same time. One of them's horizontal, one of them's vertical. Very weird, but the point is, I thought that I had to wait for the sensations to be done before I was transitioned in the dream, but I've had some transitions occur where I still feel the bodily distortions even while I'm standing in the dream already, from getting out of bed and that sort of thing. It's so bizarre, but I think it's something definitely worth experimenting with. So yeah, haven't quite figured out the perfect way to do that yet, because I just want to make sure I don't actually open up my eyes and all that. That's where I could maybe do the impossible movement practice to make sure that I can do that first. But waiting like 20 or 30 seconds almost always works anyway. Or if the sensations are very intense, I could probably just do it right then too. If the sensations are intense, I'm probably far enough in the process to do the eye-opening thing, for example, versus when they're not quite yet intense. So I haven't had much of a chance to experiment with that recently. Otherwise, I think I'd have a more straightforward answer for how to do that. But yeah, I like the idea of doing natural incremental movements too. So I actually filmed myself while doing this, and I was able to tell when I was raising my eyebrows because that did translate to a physical effort, which would explain why I kept accidentally opening up my eyes sometime. So now when I try to open up my eyes, I try to do it without raising my eyebrows. I just kind of let go of the muscle that I'm using to close my eyes. I just kind of let go of it and then it sort of opens up sometimes. That's probably a safer way to open up the eyes within the dream world during a transition. And I've waited like maybe 20 seconds before trying that. I've done it earlier, but it tends to fade away because it's too early in the process. So doing it later certainly reduces the risk of that. And even if you are too early in the process, just try again as you progress. There's been times when I open up my eyes, I could see stuff, it just kind of went away. Then I tried it again, I could see stuff, and it was kind of hard for it to stay, but it eventually became very clear. And that only happened because I was early in the process. I wasn't quite ready to be in the dream yet, but very close. So yeah, either that or make it a natural incremental movement to get out of bed that's not even imagined. I find if I do it slow enough, then it tends to apply to the dream body rather than the physical. What was interesting is when I film myself raising my eyebrows and stuff, I film myself just to see if any of my physical efforts translated to real movement. Raising my eyebrows did like pretty much every time. But when I turned my head before raising my eyebrows, it felt like I was really turning my head, but according to the camera, I wasn't. Turning my head did not translate to a physical effort, but raising my eyebrows afterwards did, which is pretty weird. I wonder if we still have control over our eyebrows while dreaming. I know we can move our eyes from what I've heard, hence the term rapid eye movement, but do we have control over our eyebrows as well? I'm gonna probably experiment with that sometime. I'm gonna film myself and see if I can raise my eyebrows in a fully formed lucid dream, whether that translates. That'd be interesting because that might be an easier way to communicate to the real world versus doing some eye movement like the up and down or left or right. Going like this might be easier if we still have control over that, for example. So yeah, those were the two big things I was experimenting with. I actually found the focus on the monkey mind was also very helpful. I only screwed up with the monkey mind when I sort of felt forced to do it rather than if it felt natural at the time. I only do it if it feels natural at the time. But I think back then I was actually sort of repressing that so that I wouldn't actually think about waking up. But rather than preventing it, it just forced things in that direction. So trying to prevent my thoughts of waking up probably caused me to wake up too. That was probably another little thing that went on. But I focus on the monkey mind if I feel like it at the time, or whatever I feel like doing at the time. But I found that engages the process quite well. If the sensations aren't very intense, I find that focusing on the monkey mind suddenly makes them very intense. It also distracts me from the intensity too. So if I'm finding that the process just isn't very engaged and stuff, I find focusing on the monkey mind or even narrating the experience brings that in. So that's also noteworthy. Doing that sort of thing might actually speed up the whole process. But like I said, sometimes I transition to a dream in like 20 or 30 seconds by either doing the eye-opening thing, getting out of bed in a natural and incremental way, or a little bit of both. So yeah, I think I'm gonna stop rambling at this point. I hope those are some helpful insights. So now you know why I'm no longer doing this series. You know about a new series I'm going to be doing pertaining to the Fitbit. You know how the app just doesn't make sense to do because of how inaccurate things are. And hopefully a better approach for maintained awareness dreams. If you never struggled with it in the first place, the last 20 or so minutes are probably irrelevant. But for those who struggle with accidentally waking up, whether it's from the anticipation of it or excitement in general, I think some of those things I shared should be helpful. Because yeah, like I said, if I feel like I'm about to wake up and I start going like this, even raising my eyebrows, that draws me away from the feeling, from focusing just on doing that. It draws me away for whatever reason. So sometimes I like to make a slight jogging motion even when I'm on my side. If I do it gently, then it feels very natural, even if my limbs are constricted or whatever. Oh, the other thing is I try not to do things like the hand opening my eyes. It worked once, but I haven't been doing it since then. I mean, I did it a couple times since then, but those failed because I was having experiences where I couldn't even feel my hands at all. I couldn't even tell where my hands were. It's like they weren't there at all. Couldn't tell if my hand was like this or what. It just felt like it didn't exist. That would probably be the muscle atonia. So that's where the limb thing might be kind of weird. If I try to move my limbs, I might experience that. I've been getting hung up on that occasionally, but that's a new problem that I'd rather have compared to accidentally waking up. But I can still avoid that even in those circumstances. Sometimes I might just do hypnagogic surfing too. If it doesn't feel natural to get out of bed, for example, and I'm having full-on hypnagogia, I might just allow myself to experience that hypnagogia. And if it goes away eventually, then I might try doing the thing where I get out of bed, or else just go with the flow and it might turn into a dream anyway. Who knows? And while I'm going with the flow, I'll probably be narrating the experience. I'll be like, that's interesting. Sort of kind of in a bleacher type setting right now. Can't quite see it, but I can hear people cheering, and that makes sense. Oh, now it looks like I'm in the add-on of my house. Let's go outside once. And I can't walk or anything right there, but I can visualize going forward and that sort of thing. That kind of helped me engage in the process. So sometimes I might just do surfing and just allow the hallucinations to happen. Depends on how I'm feeling at the time. I do whatever feels right at the time, even if it's just experiencing the hallucinations. During that experience that I just referenced, it lasted about 5 minutes of basically auditory and visual hallucinations. Even though it sucked that I wasn't in the dream and couldn't do my dream goals then, I was totally fine with that. The fact that I lasted 5 minutes without waking up or even having the concern, didn't have any concern of waking up because of this new mentality now. It just worked and it was amazing. I enjoy those experiences where I'm having auditory and visual hallucinations in bed. But the thing that was sucking the joy out of them before was the concern of waking up. Now that it's nearly gone because of the new mentality, it's so much more enjoyable now. So there's that too. The point is that might feel natural at the time too, in which case I'll just go with that. So yeah, I ramble over. So I think that'll be it for today. So if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to let me know. I'll get to you as soon as possible. Otherwise, yeah, I think that's it. So thanks for watching and have a good one. Peace.